The challenge, the great throne room of the Volanthi Empire, had never been so quiet in all its 10,000 years of history. Emperor Kalos VII sat upon his throne of living crystal, and for the first time in his long reign, his face showed something that looked very much like despair. Around him stood the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. There were the Dracarith warrior princes, massive reptilian creatures whose scales could stop plasma fire and whose strength could crush starship hulls with their bare hands. There were the Synthary nobles, beings of living crystal who had watched stars be born and die, whose bodies held centuries of combat experience and ancient wisdom. There were the Fulhari lords, a species that had conquered death itself through cloning, who feared nothing because they could simply return in new bodies whenever they were killed. There were representatives from 100 other species, each one commanding fleets and armies and technologies that lesser civilizations could barely dream of, and every single one of them was afraid. The Emperor rose from his throne, and his voice echoed through the vast chamber like thunder rolling across mountains. "You all know why I have called you here today," he said, and there was pain in every word he spoke. "My daughter, Princess Seraphine, has been marked by the Void Weavers." A ripple of fear passed through the assembled nobles, and several of them took unconscious steps backward. The Void Weavers were ancient beyond measure, older than the first civilizations, older perhaps than the stars themselves. They were not truly alive in any way that normal beings understood. They were tears in reality, places where the fabric of consciousness itself frayed, and something hungry looked through from the other side. They fed on minds, on souls, on everything that made a person who they were, and they had marked the princess as their next vessel. "The oracles have spoken," the Emperor continued, his hands gripping the arms of his throne so tightly that the crystal began to crack in 3 galactic cycles. "The Weavers will claim her mind, and through her royal bloodline, they will gain access to the psionic network that connects all Volanthi across all our worlds." The implications of this were clear to everyone present. If the Weavers took the princess, they would have a doorway into the minds of every Volanthi in existence. An entire species would be consumed. "But there is one way to save her," the Emperor said. And now his eyes moved across the crowd, searching, hoping, desperate. The bonding ritual, more whispers filled the room. And this time, the fear was even stronger. The bonding ritual was ancient, a joining of 2 consciousness so complete that they became anchored to each other forever. If someone bonded with the princess, they can hold her soul in place, keep the Weavers from pulling her into the darkness. But there was a price. The person who bonded with her would also be exposed to the Weavers. They would also be targeted for consumption. It was, in simple terms, a death sentence shared between 2 people instead of suffered by one alone. The Emperor looked at the Dracarith princes, those mighty warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds and feared no enemy in battle. They looked away. He looked at the Synthary nobles, those ancient beings who had seen everything the universe had to offer. Across countless millennia, they suddenly found the floor very interesting. He looked at the Fulhari lords, who could not truly die, who could simply return again and again. Even they shook their heads, because the Weavers did not kill bodies, but rather devoured souls. And there was no cloning technology that could bring back what the Weavers took. The Emperor's desperation turned to rage, and his voice rose until it shook the very walls of the throne room. "Is there no one brave enough to marry my daughter?" He roared. The words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off crystal walls and high ceilings, fading slowly into a silence that felt heavier than the gravity of a neutron star. No one moved. No one spoke. Most powerful beings in the galaxy stood frozen, united in their terror of what the Emperor was asking. And then, from the very back of the throne room, where the lesser delegations stood in the shadows, a single voice rang out clear and strong. "I will do it." Every head in the room turned at once. The crowd parted, and through the gap walked a figure that made several of the nobles actually laugh out loud. It was a human. He was small compared to the Dracarith, fragile compared to the Syntheri, mortal in ways the Filhari could barely remember. He wore simple armor, nothing like the ornate battlesuits of the other species. Just the practical gray and blue of the Terran Expeditionary Knights. His name, as the galaxy would soon learn, was Commander Marcus Cole. Humanity was one of the youngest species to achieve interstellar travel. They had stumbled into the stars barely 2 centuries ago, climbing out of their single small world on rockets that the other species considered laughably primitive. They had no psionic abilities whatsoever. Their bodies were soft and easily damaged, and their individual lifespans were short that most other species found it genuinely tragic. They were considered by most of the galaxy to be clever primitives, interesting enough to trade with, but certainly not important enough to take seriously. And now one of them was volunteering to face the Void Weavers. Prince Vorath of the Dracarith stepped forward, his massive form casting Marcus entirely in shadow. The prince stood 3 meters tall, his scales gleaming like polished metal, his eyes burning with contempt. "This is an insult, Emperor," Vorath growled, and his voice was like boulders grinding together. "Send this creature back to whatever backwater rock spawned him. Because what could a human possibly offer your daughter except a quick death and the stench of failure?" Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, but Marcus Cole did not flinch, did not step back, did not show any sign of fear at all. He simply looked up at the massive Dracarith prince and said in a calm, steady voice, "I offer her something that none of you can." "And what is that, little human?" Vorath asked with a sneer. "I offer her someone who is not afraid." The laughter stopped. Princess Seraphine, who had remained silent on her smaller throne beside her father, leaned forward and looked at the human with new interest. She had watched the most powerful warriors in the galaxy turn pale at her father's challenge. She had seen ancient beings who had fought in wars before. Humanity had discovered fire, suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere, but this small and fragile creature from a minor world stood before her father's wrath and the mockery of princes without trembling even slightly. "You do not even understand what you are volunteering for," Seraphine said, and her voice echoed with the harmonic resonance that marked Volanthi royalty. Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time their eyes met. "I understand perfectly, Your Highness," he said quietly. "The Void Weavers will try to consume both of us, and you need an anchor. Someone to hold on to you while they try to pull you into the dark. And you believe you can resist them?" She asked. "You, whose species cannot even sense the psionic spectrum." Marcus Cole smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even Prince Vorath take a small step backward. "Your Highness," the human said, "that is exactly why I can resist them." The mockery, the days that followed Marcus Cole's bold declaration, were filled with chaos and controversy that spread across the entire galaxy. News travels fast between the stars when that news is strange enough. And this news was stranger than anything anyone had heard in a very long time. A human had volunteered to bond with the Volanthi Pronace's human had offered to face the Void Weavers. The reactions ranged from disbelief to outrage to something that might have been called amusement if it were not so cruel. In the great halls of the Dracarith homeworld, warriors laughed until their scales rattled. The humans think they are heroes now, Prince Vorath told his fellow princes over cups of fermented starfire. They have been in space for barely 2 centuries, and already they believe they can do what we cannot. "Perhaps we should let him try," another prince suggested with a cruel smile. "It will be entertaining to watch him fail, and it will teach humanity its proper place in the order of things." On the crystalline moons of the Syntheri, the ancient beings discussed the matter with the slow patience of creatures who measured time in millennia rather than years. The humans are an interesting species, one elder observed. Light refracting through their body in patterns that conveyed deep thought. They have accomplished much in a short time. But they are still children playing at games they do not understand. This one will die. Another agreed that perhaps his death will be instructive for his people, even among the humans themselves. The news was met with mixed reactions. Some called Marcus Cole a hero for standing up when no one else would. Others called him a fool for volunteering for what was obviously a suicide mission. His own commanding officers sent urgent messages demanding to know what he thought he was doing. Marcus ignored them all. He had made his choice, and he would not take it back on the Volanthi homeworld. The Emperor had accepted the humans' offer, despite the protests of virtually every noble house in his empire. What choice did he have? After all, no one else had stepped forward. No one else was willing to save his daughter, and Marcus Cole, whatever else he might be, at least seemed to understand what he was walking into. The official betrothal ceremony was held 3 days after Marcus made his offer, and it was perhaps the most awkward event in the history of interstellar diplomacy. Marcus stood in his simple Terran armor among beings who wore battle suits worth more than entire planets. He was smaller than almost everyone in the room, was younger than almost everyone in the room. He was, by every measure the galaxy used, inferior to almost everyone in the room. And yet he stood there without shame, without fear, without any sign that he understood how ridiculous this all looked to the assembled nobles. Princess Seraphine watched him throughout the ceremony with eyes that revealed nothing of her thoughts. She was tall for a Volanthi, graceful in the way that all her people were graceful, with skin that seemed to glow faintly with inner light. The dark marks of the Void Weaver's curse were visible on her arms, spreading slowly like ink dropped in water, a constant reminder of what was coming after the ceremony. She approached Marcus for the first time since his offer. "Walk with me," she said. And it was not a request. They walked through the crystal gardens of the palace, where flowers made of living light bloomed in colors that human eyes could barely process. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Seraphine broke the silence. "Why did you really do it?" she asked. "I have read about your species, and you are not known for suicidal gestures." "It is not a suicidal gesture, Your Highness." "Then what is it?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "When I was a child on Earth, my grandmother told me a story about a village that was threatened by a flood," he said. "All the villagers ran away except for one old woman who stayed behind to help a stranger who could not walk. And my grandmother asked me what I thought of that old woman. What did you tell her?" "I said she was foolish because she died saving someone she did not even know." Seraphine nodded slightly. "A logical answer." My grandmother disagreed. Marcus continued. "She said that the old woman was the only one in the village who understood what it meant to be human, because humans do not abandon people who need help, and we do not walk past someone drowning because the water might be cold. That is a very strange philosophy." "Maybe it is," Marcus agreed, "but it is also why we are still here." "What do you mean?" "Humanity almost destroyed itself a dozen times before we left our homeworld," Marcus said. And there was something in his voice that Seraphine had not heard from any of the other species who had come to mock or observe it. It was honesty. "We fought wars that killed millions, and we built weapons that could have ended all life on our planet. And we poisoned our air and water, and came within years of making our world uninhabitable." "I am aware of your history," Seraphine said. "It is one of the reasons my people do not take yours seriously. But we are still here," Marcus said again. "Every time we came to the edge of destruction, someone stepped forward and did what needed to be done. And sometimes the person was a hero with armies behind them, and sometimes it was just an ordinary person who saw something wrong and refused to accept it." He looked up at the alien sky above them. at the unfamiliar stars that humanity had only recently begun to explore. Your father asked if anyone was brave enough to save you. And I looked around that room and saw creatures who could tear me apart with their bare hands. Beings who have lived for thousands of years. Species who have conquered death itself. And none of them answered. None of them answered. Marcus agreed. So I did. Because that is what humans do, and we see someone who needs help, and we help them. Even if it is scary, even if it might kill us. Even if everyone else thinks we are fools for trying. Seraphine studied him for a long moment, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression. The trials will begin tomorrow, she said. My father's advisors insist on testing you before the bonding ritual. What kind of trials? The kind that are designed to break you, she said simply. They want to prove that you are not worthy. That humanity is not ready for this responsibility. And they will push you until you fail or die. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I will try not to fail or die. You say that as if it is simple. It is not simple, Marcus admitted, but it is not complicated either. Because I made a promise, and I intend to keep it. He offered her a small smile. The kind of smile that Seraphine had never seen on the face of any of the warriors or princes who had competed for her. Attention over the centuries, it was not the smile of someone who was confident in their own power. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how scared. They were and had decided to go forward anyway. I will see you tomorrow. Your Highness, Marcus said, and he bowed in the human fashion before walking back toward the palace. Seraphine watched him go. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hope. It was small, fragile, and probably foolish, but it was there and she held onto it the way a drowning person holds onto a rope. Because right now, this strange little human was the only rope she had. The preparation, the trials began at dawn, and they did not stop. Marcus Cole was taken from his quarters by Volanthi guards who said nothing as they led him through corridors of living crystal to a chamber deep beneath the palace. There he found the emperor's advisors waiting for him, along with representatives from a dozen species who had come specifically to watch the human fail. The first test was simple. They put him in a room and removed all the air a normal human could survive in vacuum for perhaps 15 seconds before losing consciousness. And the advisors expected Marcus to panic, to scream, to beg for mercy. He did none of these things. Instead, as the air rushed out of the chamber, Marcus grabbed a piece of his own torn uniform and used his body heat to partially seal the tear in the chamber's emergency hatch. It was not a perfect seal, and it was not enough air to survive for long, but it was enough to extend his survival time from seconds to minutes by the time the advisors ended the test. Marcus was unconscious, but alive. He woke up in the medical bay with Princess Seraphine standing over him. That was either very clever or very stupid, she said. Sometimes those are the same thing. Marcus replied with a weak smile. The second test was worse. They placed him in a chamber that amplified fear. A device created by the Synthri to break the minds of prisoners during ancient wars. The chamber reached into the deepest parts of the brain and found every terror hidden there. Then magnified those terrors until they became overwhelming. Warriors who had faced death in 1,000 battles had been reduced to screaming children by this device. Marcus entered the chamber, and the fear began. He saw himself dying alone in the cold of space. He saw humanity destroyed, every colony burned, every ship broken, every human who had ever lived forgotten by a galaxy that had never cared about them. He saw the Void Weavers consuming Seraphine while he watched helplessly, unable to save her, unable to do anything but scream, and through it all, he did something that the observers had never seen before. He closed his eyes and started counting his breaths, one breath in, one breath out. His grandmother had taught him this when he was 7 years old and afraid of the dark. The fear is real. She had told him. But you do not have to let it control you, because you are bigger than the fear. You are stronger than the fear, and as long as you keep breathing, the fear cannot win. Marcus kept breathing. He did not stop the fear because that was impossible. Instead, he simply refused to let the fear stop him when they finally pulled him out of the chamber. His hands were shaking, and his face was wet with tears, but he was still functional. He was still sane. He was still standing. How? One of the Synthery observers demanded. How did you resist? Marcus wiped his face with a trembling hand. I have been afraid before, he said simply. This was worse than anything I have felt before. But fear is fear, and you cannot let it make your choices for you. The third test was combat day. Put Marcus in an arena against Dracorath warriors. The same species whose prince had mocked him in the throne room. The first warrior was young by Dracorath standards, barely 500 years old. But he was still twice Marcus's size and covered in natural armor. The fight lasted less than a minute. Marcus was thrown across the arena. His armor cracked. 2 ribs broken, but he stood up. The second warrior was larger, older, more experienced. This fight lasted even shorter. Marcus was beaten so badly that the medical staff had to rush in to prevent permanent damage, but when they had healed him enough to continue, he stood up again, and again they sent warriors against him. And again he was defeated. His body was broken in ways that would have killed him without Volanti medical technology. His blood stained the arena floor so many times that the cleaning systems could not keep up, and every single time he stood back up. Finally, after the 12th fight, Prince Vorath himself entered the arena. Enough of this foolishness. The massive Dracorath growled, I will end this myself, and prove once and for all that humanity has no place among the real powers of this galaxy. Vorath attacked with the speed and power of a creature bred for war across 1,000 generations. He did not hold back. He did not show mercy. He intended to kill the human and face whatever political consequences followed. The fight was not even close. Marcus was thrown against the arena wall so hard that the crystal cracked behind him. Breath claws tore through his armor and into the flesh beneath. A single strike from the prince's tail shattered Marcus's left arm completely, and still, somehow, impossibly, Marcus Cole stood back up. He could barely see through the blood running down his face. He could barely breathe through his damaged lungs, but he raised his one remaining functional arm and gestured for Vorath to continue. What are you? Vorath demanded, and for the first time, there was something other than contempt in his voice. I am human, Marcus said through broken teeth. This is what we do. Because we do not stop, we do not quit, and we do not give up. Even when we should. You cannot possibly win this fight. I know, Marcus agreed. But I can keep getting back up until you get tired of knocking me down. Vorath stared at him for a long moment. And then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He turned and walked out of the arena. The test is over, he announced to the silent crowd. The human has passed. Later that night, Marcus lay in the medical bay while machines repaired his shattered body. Seraphine sat beside him, watching the process with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been wonder. Why do you keep fighting? She asked. You could have withdrawn with honor days ago, because that is what humans do, Marcus replied, wincing as the bone knitter did its work. We are not the strongest or the fastest, and we do not have scales or crystalline bodies or 5,000 years of warrior tradition. Then what do you have? Stubbornness, Marcus said with a painful laugh. We are the most stubborn creatures in the universe. And we pursued mammoths across continents until they collapsed from exhaustion. We survived ice ages with nothing but fire and determination. And we looked at the stars and said we are going there, even though we had no right to expect we could. He turned his head to look at her directly. Your Highness, The Void Weavers are going to try to break me. And they should know that humanity has been trying to break itself for our entire history. And we are still here. Seraphim felt that warmth again. That strange new feeling that had started when Marcus first stepped forward in the throne room. I think I understand now, she said quietly. Understand what? Why my father accepted your offer when everyone told him not to, she said. It is not because you are strong enough to face the Weavers. Because you are not. And it is not because you are brave enough to fight them. Because bravery alone means nothing against beings like them. Then why? Because you are human, Seraphine said. And humans are the only species in the galaxy who simply refuse to accept when they are supposed to lose. She reached out and took his unbroken hand. And Marcus felt something pass between them that had nothing to do with the bonding ritual that was still to come. Get some rest, she said softly. Tomorrow the real battle begins. Marcus closed his eyes. And for the first time since he had stepped forward in the throne room, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. The ancient temple stood at the heart of the Volanthi homeworld. A structure so old that no one remembered who had built it or why. Its walls were made of crystal that sang with frequencies beyond the range of normal hearing. And its floors were carved with patterns that hurt the eyes if you looked at them too long above the temple. The sky was thick with gathered warships from every major power in the galaxy. They had all come to watch, most of them expected to witness a Vustasis spectacular failure that would finally prove humanity's insignificance once and for all. Marcus Cole stood at the center of the temple, wearing simple white robes that the Volanthi priests had given him. Across from him stood Princess Seraphine, dressed in the traditional bonding garments of her people. Layers of flowing fabric that seemed to move on their own between them floated a sphere of pure light. The focus point for the ritual that would bind their consciousness together, Emperor Kalos, stood to one side. His face a mask of desperate hope. He had bet everything on this human, and in a few moments, he would learn if that bet had been wise or foolish. The priest began to chant in a language older than the Volanthi Empire itself. The sphere of light grew brighter. Marcus felt a strange pulling sensation in his mind, like something was reaching through his skull and touching parts of him that he had never known existed across the temple. Seraphine gasped as she felt the same thing. Their consciousness began to reach toward each other, stretching across the space between them like two hands trying to clasp in the dark. And then the Void Weavers came. They did not enter through doors or windows because they did not exist in physical space. They simply appeared. Tears in reality itself, places where the universe frayed and something ancient and hungry looked. Through the temperature in the temple dropped so fast that frost formed on the crystal walls. The light of the bonding sphere flickered and almost went out. The chanting of the priest faltered as terror gripped their hearts. Marcus felt the Weaver's attention fall upon the temple like the weight of a dying star. They were vast beyond comprehension, older than the oldest civilizations, hungry in ways that no living creature could truly understand. They had come for Seraphine, and nothing in the galaxy had ever stopped them from taking what they wanted. The Weavers reached for the princess first, because she was the prize they had marked. Her consciousness blazed like a beacon in the psionic realm, trained since childhood in the mental arts of her people. Vast and luminous and terrifyingly vulnerable, they began their harvest. And Seraphine screamed as she felt herself being unraveled like thread pulled from a spool. Marcus could feel it through the incomplete bond, could feel her terror and pain and desperate struggle against forces she could not hope to defeat. And then the Weavers turned their attention to him. They reached for his mind the same way they had reached for hers, expecting to find the same easy prey, another consciousness to consume, another soul to devour. What they found instead was something they had never encountered in 10 million years of predation. They found nothing, not emptiness, not void, not absence, nothing. A human mind was so fundamentally different from psionic species that the weavers simply could not find purchase. It was like trying to grab smoke with bare hands. It was like trying to devour a shadow. They pushed harder, using techniques that had broken gods and consumed civilizations. And still they found nothing they could hold on to. Marcus felt them trying, felt their confusion and frustration, felt them reach deeper and deeper into his mind, looking for something they could use. And then he did something that no one had ever done to the Send Void Weavers before he pushed back. He was not psionic. He had no training in mental combat. He had none of the abilities that species like the Volanthi took for granted, but he had something else. He had 60,000 years of human stubbornness bred into his bones. He had the determination of a species that had looked at every obstacle in its path and simply refused to accept that it could not be overcome. He had the pure, bloody-minded refusal to quit that had carried humanity from caves to stars in the blink of a cosmic eye. In the psionic realm, where the battle was truly being fought, Marcus wrapped his consciousness around Seraphine like an anchored chain. He could feel the weavers pulling at her, trying to tear her away from him, and he held on tighter. He could feel them trying to devour him too, trying to find some crack in his strange human mind that they could exploit. And he simply denied their existence, not fought them, not resisted them, but denied them. You are not real. He told them with every fiber of his being, you have no power over me, because I refuse to believe that you do. The weavers recoiled in something that might have been shock. They had fed on species beyond counting. They had consumed minds that made Seraphines look like a candle next to a sun. They had broken beings who were worshipped as gods by lesser creatures, but they had never, in all their endless existence, encountered a mind that simply refused to acknowledge their power. You cannot have her, Marcus told them, and his voice in the psionic realm was not loud or powerful, but it was absolutely unwavering. I do not care what you are. I do not care that I cannot hurt you. I do not care that I am nothing compared to you. I will stand here until the stars burn out if I have to. And you will not have hers. The weavers pressed against him like a tide of darkness, trying to overwhelm him with their sheer existence. They showed him visions of his own death, of humanity's extinction, of every terrible thing they had done across the eons. And Marcus Cole, son of Earth, knight of the Terran Expeditionary Forces, simply held on. He held on because Seraphine needed him to. Held on because he had made a promise. He held on because that was what humans did. And they did not let go just because it was hard or scary or impossible. The battle lasted seconds or centuries. Marcus could not tell. Time had no meaning in the psionic realm, and the weavers existed outside of normal reality entirely. But at some point, Marcus became aware that the pressure against his mind was lessening. The terrible pulling sensation that had been trying to tear Seraphine away from him was weakening, and then, suddenly, impossibly, the Void Weavers retreated. They did not disappear entirely, because they were tears in reality itself and could not truly be destroyed. But they withdrew from the temple, pulling back from Seraphine's mind, releasing their hold on her soul in the physical world. The frost on the temple walls began to melt. The light of the bonding sphere blazed brighter than ever before. The priests took up their chanting again, their voices trembling but triumphant. The bond between Marcus Cole and Princess Seraphine completed itself in a rush of light and warmth that filled the temple like sunrise after an eternal night. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his body shaking with exhaustion. Seraphine fell as well, but she was laughing and crying at the same time. Reaching for him across the temple floor, they met in the middle, and Marcus held her as she wept against his shoulder. You did it, she whispered, You actually did it. Marcus did not have the strength to answer, but he did not need to through the bond they now shared. She could feel everything he was feeling, relief and exhaustion and something else. Something warm that neither of them had expected, something that felt like the beginning of love above the temple. The gathered warships were silent. The galaxy had just witnessed something that no one had ever seen before. A human had faced the void weavers and had not been consumed. A human had saved a princess of the most ancient bloodline in the galaxy. Nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath. Marcus Cole woke in a bed that was far too comfortable to be the medical bay. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the soft golden light that filled the room, and found himself staring at a ceiling made of living crystal that pulsed gently with colors he could not name. "You have been asleep for 3 days," said a familiar voice. Marcus turned his head and saw Princess Seraphine sitting in a chair beside his bed. And for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. She was beautiful in a way that humans rarely saw, her skin glowing faintly with inner light, her eyes bright and clear, and completely free of the dark marks that had once crawled across her arms. The curse was broken. The void weavers were gone. She was free. "How do you feel?" she asked, and through the bond they now shared, Marcus could sense her concern mixing with relief and joy, and something warmer that made his heart beat faster. "Like I fought something I had no business fighting, and somehow did not die," Marcus admitted. Seraphine smiled, and it was the first real smile he had ever seen on her face. "That is a very accurate description of what happened." She reached out and took his hand, and the contact sent a pleasant warmth through the bond between them. "They are calling you the Voidbreaker now," she said. "The story of what you did has spread to every corner of the galaxy, and no one knows quite what to make of it. What happened while I was asleep?" "Everything changed," Seraphine said simply. "The Council of Species has formally recognized humanity as a major power, and my father has already received requests from dozens of civilizations who want to open new diplomatic relations with Earth." Marcus stared at her in shock. "Major power status?" "Because of me." "Because of what you proved," Seraphine corrected. "For centuries, the other species looked at humanity and saw only your weaknesses. And they saw your short lifespans and your fragile bodies and your complete lack of psionic ability. And they thought you were beneath their notice. And now? Now they have seen what human stubbornness truly means," she said. "They watched you stand against the Void Weavers, beings that have destroyed civilizations and broken gods. And they watched you refuse to bend." She squeezed his hand gently. "You showed them that humanity is not weak. And you are simply strong in ways they never understood until now." There was a knock at the door, and Emperor Kalos entered the room. He looked different than he had in the throne room. The desperation and fear replaced by something that might have been gratitude or respect, or perhaps both. "Commander Cole," the Emperor said, and his voice was formal but warm. "I owe you a debt that I can never repay. For you have saved my daughter and my entire species from a fate worse than death." Marcus tried to sit up, but Seraphine gently pushed him back down. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, "I only did what needed to be done, and that is precisely why I am in your debt." Kalos replied, "In a room full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, you were the only one who answered my call. And you did it not for glory or reward, but simply because someone needed help." The Emperor moved closer to the bed. "I have been in contact with your government on Earth, and they are very proud of you, but also very confused about what happens now." "What do you mean?" "The bonding ritual was completed," Seraphine said softly, and there was a hint of nervousness in her voice that Marcus could feel through their connection. "That means we are bound together permanently, and our consciousness are linked in ways that cannot be undone. It also means," Kalos continued, "that by the ancient laws of my people, You are now my son-in-law and a prince of the Volanti Empire. Marcus blinked. I am sorry. Did you say prince? I did, Kalos confirmed, and there was a hint of amusement in his ancient eyes. The galaxy's newest major power has just married into the oldest royal bloodline in known space. And the diplomatic implications are giving my advisors headaches that I suspect will last for decades. I did not do this for power or titles. Marcus said quickly. We know. Seraphine said. That is part of why it matters so much. She helped him sit up despite her earlier objections. And when he was upright, she did not move away. Instead, she stayed close, her hand still holding his. Their bond, humming with emotions that were still new and strange and wonderful. My father has offered you anything you desire, she said. Titles. Worlds, fleets, whatever you want is yours for the asking. Marcus thought about this for a long moment. He thought about all the power he could claim, all the wealth he could accumulate, all the things that most people would have asked for without hesitation, and then he looked at Seraphine. And through their bond, he felt something that made all of those things seem meaningless. I did not do this for rewards, he said. Then why? Kalos asked. Why did you really step forward when everyone else was too afraid? Marcus remembered his grandmother's story. Remembered the old woman who had stayed behind to help a stranger she did not know, because someone needed help. He said simply, and everyone else was too afraid to give it. But that is what you do when you are human, and you do not walk past someone drowning because the water might be cold. Seraphine looked at her father, and something passed between them that needed no words. I think I am beginning to understand, she said. Why your species survived all those centuries on your homeworld when you should have destroyed yourselves a dozen times over. Because we are too stupid to know when to give up. Marcus asked with a small smile. Because you are too brave to care. She corrected, and then, before Marcus could say anything else, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, a first kiss, full of promise and possibility, and the beginning of something that neither of them had expected when all of this started through their bond. Marcus felt her joy and her hope and her love, and he let her feel the same from him when they finally pulled apart. Kalos was smiling in a way that made him look almost human. I will leave you two alone, the Emperor said. I suspect you have much to discuss about the future. He paused at the door and looked back. Welcome to the family, son. After he left, Marcus and Seraphine sat together in comfortable silence, their hands still linked, their minds gently touching through the bond. What happens now? Marcus asked eventually. Now we build something new, Seraphine said. The galaxy is changing because of what you did. And humanity has a place at the table of great powers. And we have a bond that will last until the stars themselves grow cold. She rested her head on his shoulder. I think we are going to be very busy for a very long time, Marcus laughed. And through their bond, Seraphine felt the warmth and joy that filled him. Then we better get started, he said outside the window. The stars shone bright and endless, and somewhere among them, humanity was waking up to a new reality. There were no longer the young species that had stumbled into space barely 2 centuries ago. They were no longer the clever primitives that the older civilizations looked down upon. They were a major power now, recognized by the entire galaxy as a force to be reckoned with, and it had all started because one human had heard a call for help and had refused to let fear stop him from answering. The galaxy had learned a lesson that day, a lesson that humanity had known since the first humans had gathered around fires in the darkness. It is not the strongest, or the fastest, or the oldest who survive. It is those who refuse to give up, is those who keep getting back up no matter how many times they are knocked down. It is those who see someone in need and help them, even when it is dangerous, even when it is terrifying, even when everyone else says it cannot be done. The Void Weavers had learned that lesson too, and they would not forget it for a very long time. The end.